Hello, boys and girls. Welcome to our Mission Adventure series that we began just a couple of days ago. And you remember that the very first story that I told you was about the big yellow truck, and that was from the island of Ceylon, which today is called Sri Lanka, and just a small island off the coast of India. And then we went all the way to Russia, and we learned of a man by the name of Joseph Wolof, and who was selling Bibles in Russia. And we call that story the haunted house. Some of you probably heard that story. Hopefully all of you heard that story. And today we're going to talk about a man who couldn't count to three. Now, I think that everybody that's listening to this knows how to count to three. You can start counting with me, right? It's so easy. 1, 2, 3. That's so simple. But I want to tell you about a man who couldn't count to three. Where does this story come from? Well, we have to go all the way. This is a picture of our world right now. And if you go all the way out in the largest ocean in the entire world, which is the Pacific Ocean, and you go all the way across, you see where it's highlighted in red, there's a small group of islands that are called the Solomon Islands. Now, the Solomon Islands many, many years ago was a very, very dangerous place for you to go, because there were people that were called headhunters and cannibals. They ate other people. And so they were very scary looking people. They had all kinds of bones through their noses and all kinds of painting on them. They were very frightful looking people that lived on the Solomon Islands. Nobody ever went anywhere near the Solomon Islands, but there was a wonderful missionary, a Seventh-day Adventist missionary that said, you know what? God can protect us if we go there, because those people need to know about Jesus too. And so this missionary went there, and being very, very brave, he came there and he taught them the stories about Jesus. And slowly the bones started coming out of their nose, the paint started coming off of their face, and they listened to the story, and they didn't look like angry men anymore. They looked like happy and radiant people. And all of a sudden their face just shone with the beauty of Jesus. They had the most wonderful smiles. They were beautiful people there. Well, the chief of the village there had died, and his son became the new chief, and his name was Kataragoso. Kataragoso was a very, very strong man. He was a very tall man. And Kataragoso, I don't have a picture of Kataragoso here, but Kataragoso was the chief of the island, and he now was in charge of everybody. Well, many of those people became Sabbath keepers, and they worshiped on the Sabbath day. They knew Jesus, and they loved one thing more than anything else, and that is to sing. Boy, could they sing. They knew how to sing. And on Sabbath evening, on Friday evening, just when the sun was setting, they all gathered together in a little temple area, and they would just sing their hearts out. This is what their little temple, their church looked like. They built a little temple like that with thatched roof, and they would meet there on Friday nights. They would just get there together, and wow, the whole island where they were could hear this. Now, there were many, many islands in the Solomon Islands. This island is where Kataragoso was the chief, and he would lead them out with singing, and they would love to sing to welcome the Sabbath hours. Well, a terrible thing was happening in the world at that time. This was a long time ago, and probably about 70 or 80 years ago, the world was at war. And the Japanese army was, they were at war with the United States of America. And so Japanese ships were very, very nearby the Solomon Islands. And so this army ship, this Japanese army ship kept coming closer and closer to one of the Solomon Islands, and kept coming closer to the island where Kataragoso was the chief. Well, it was a Friday afternoon, and the ship pulled into a nearby island there, and they sent some soldiers to say, we need some help unloading some of these boxes that have guns and arms in it. We need all the strong men of the village. Who is your chief here? And so finally they found out that Kara-Ragoso was the chief. And so they went to Kara-Ragoso and said, get your men to come here at sunset and help us unload the ship before it gets too dark. Kara-Ragoso said through the translator, he says, sir, we observe the seventh-day Sabbath. And on Saturday and on Friday night when the sun goes down, we welcome the Sabbath, and we do not work on the Sabbath day. And so I'm sorry, we cannot unload your ship until Sunday morning. And the commander was very, very angry. The commander of the Japanese Navy was so angry, he was enraged. He said, you will do as I say. I am the commander of this ship. And if I say that this ship has to be unloaded tonight, it will be unloaded tonight. Do you understand me? And Kara-Ragoso said, we cannot do that. We have to obey God. And so he says, there will be terrible consequences if you do not have your men here. And so that evening, Kara-Ragoso went back to the church with all the men and women and their families, their little children. They all went back to that church, and they sat there and they said, we need to pray. And so they prayed, dear God, help us not to have any trouble with the Japanese Navy here. I pray that you'll be with us through this terrible, terrible situation that we're facing. Then they said, well, let's sing. You know how we like to sing on Sabbath. And so they started singing their songs. Well, while they were singing, soldiers from the Japanese Navy, those soldiers came up with the commander sending them to go get Kara-Ragoso and to bring him down. Well, Kara-Ragoso was brought down. They just went right through the middle of that church. They grabbed Kara-Ragoso, and even though Kara-Ragoso was very strong, he didn't try to put a fight. He didn't fight with them. He just said, okay, I'm coming. But nobody else moved. Nobody was willing to unload anything because it was the Sabbath day. And they didn't want to disappoint God. They didn't want to disobey God. And so they kept on singing. But as soon as Kara-Ragoso was taken, the church started praying, oh dear God, please be with our beloved Kara-Ragoso. He's such a good chief. Please protect him. And the commander said, because you have disobeyed, I am going to make an example of you to all your village. Tomorrow we will be taking you, and we will be taking you, and you will be judged. And if you are found guilty of not obeying the orders of the commander of the Japanese army, you will be sentenced to die by a firing squad. Do you understand me? Kara-Ragoso put his head down and he said, yes, sir. So the next morning, they brought Kara-Ragoso. They put him in some kind of a shelter that they built, and they locked him up in that. Kara-Ragoso could have easily broken that shelter and escaped, but Kara-Ragoso was there, and he was just praying, saying, dear God, if I have to die because I obeyed you, it's okay, because I want to obey you more than anybody else. Kara-Ragoso stayed in that, and on Sabbath morning, the commander brought him out, and he said, because you have been found guilty of not obeying the commander of the Japanese Navy ship, I am sentencing you to be taken out and to be put in front of a firing squad, and they will shoot you to death. Well, Kara-Ragoso was taken out, and they put him there, and all the soldiers lined up. And the commander said, on the count of 3, you will fire your rifles and shoot Kara-Ragoso dead. And all the soldiers stood there very, very still. And as they stood there very still, they raised their guns when he said, On your mark, aim, ready? On the count of three. On the count of three, fire. And he started counting. 1, 2. He couldn't say the word 3. And the soldiers started laughing a little bit, like, what's wrong with our commander? But they didn't want to laugh too loud because he might get mad with them. And so then again, he said, on the count of 3. Do you hear me? On the count of 3. 1, 2. But he couldn't say the number 3. And he tried it one more time. He says, on the count of 3. 1, 2. And he couldn't say the word 3. And Kara Rugoso was wondering what was happening here. And Kara Rugoso was just standing there, and those men couldn't fire their rifles because the commander said, only fire your guns when I count to 3. And the commander couldn't say the word 3. So the commander got so angry, he said, take the prisoner and lock him back up, and tomorrow morning on Sunday we will do the same thing again. So the soldiers got Kara Rugoso as their prisoner. They bound his hands up, they tied his hands, and then they took him and put him in that same place where he had stayed the night before. Well, something very strange happened that night. As Kara Rugoso was sleeping, he felt somebody just tap him on his shoulder. And he thought he was dreaming something. So he woke up and he looked. And the ropes that were around his arms were all loose. And he thought, I think I must be just dreaming this. But then, that person that he was seeing motioned for him like this. And so Kara Rugoso got up and he looked all around, and all the Japanese soldiers were sleeping. And so Kara Rugoso made his way out to the beach. It was late or very, very early on Sunday morning. And the sun was just barely coming up, but everybody was fast asleep. And Kara Rugoso looked out there and he saw a boat right on the beach. And Kara Rugoso looked around to thank the person, but that person was no longer there. And then Kara Rugoso realized, God must have sent his angel to protect me and to save me from those wicked men. So Kara Rugoso got in his boat and he rowed far away to another island where they wouldn't find him. And he stayed there for many, many weeks until the war was over, before he came back to his island. The Bible tells us in Psalm chapter 34 and verse 7 that the angel of the Lord encamps around those who fear him, and he delivers them. You remember the story of Peter when he was put into prison? Very much like Kara Rugoso. He was in prison and King Herod was going to kill him. But that night, God sent his angel to help those chains fall off of Peter. And the guards fell asleep. And Peter was able to escape from prison because an angel guided him out of prison. And the same story happened with Daniel. In Daniel, the 6th chapter and verse 22, we see that God sent his angel and he shut the mouth of the lions. And Daniel told the king, they have not hurt me because I was found innocent in his sight, nor have I done anything wrong before you, your majesty. Daniel experienced God's hand in shutting the mouths of those lions, just like God sent his angel to shut the mouth of that Japanese commander who couldn't say the word 3 when he was trying to execute one of God's faithful people. whenever we trust God and put our hearts and our lives in His care, God will be there taking care of us.